It was April 26, 1999, a quiet spring afternoon in London, until a chilling call came through to emergency services. A man walking along Gowan Avenue reported a woman collapsed on her own doorstep, blood pooling beneath her, her arms already turning blue. There were no signs of life. Then came the words that would shock an entire nation. The victim looked like Jill Dando, one of Britain's most beloved television presenters. For millions, Jill was more than just a broadcaster. She was warm, approachable, and instantly familiar. The girl next door with a winning smile. She carried herself with generosity, curiosity, and charm, the kind of woman people felt they already knew, even if they had never met her. Jill Wendy Dando was born on November 9, 1961, in the seaside town of Weston-super-Mare, Somerset. The youngest child of Jack and Winifred Dando, she grew up in a devout Baptist household, shaped by values of respect, discipline, and community. Her father and elder brother Nigel both worked in local journalism, and it was within that world that Jill found her calling. After finishing school, she pursued journalism at a local college and began work as a trainee at the very paper her family had long served. Ambitious and talented, she quickly made her mark. Soon, she joined the BBC, starting with regional radio and television before moving to London in 1988. By 1989, she was already established as a rising star on BBC Breakfast. It was there she met Bob Wheaton, the program's news editor, who would become not only her partner but also a mentor. Their relationship lasted nearly 7 years and shaped the trajectory of her career. With Bob's support and her own relentless drive, Jill rose through the ranks, presenting news bulletins, holiday programs, antiques features, songs of praise, her face becoming one of the most recognizable in British broadcasting. In 1995, Jill took on the role that placed her firmly in the public eye, co-presenter of BBC's Crimewatch, alongside Nick Ross. Each month, she fronted appeals to help solve some of the nation's most serious crimes, a role that carried both prestige and risk. Like many female presenters, Jill sometimes received disturbing and threatening letters. Colleagues, including Alice Beer, also faced the same, but within the BBC's culture at the time, such warnings were often brushed aside. Despite the darker side of fame, Jill continued to shine. By the late 1990s, she was not only a national figure, but also deeply content in her personal life. At the time of her death, she was in a happy relationship with Dr. Alan Farthing, a respected gynecologist. To the outside world, her life seemed full of promise. No one could have predicted that on a mild Monday in April, everything would come crashing down. By 1999, Jill Dando had been living happily with her fiancé, Dr. Alan Farthing. She was in the process of selling her house on Gowan Avenue in Fulham, and only returned there occasionally. On the morning of April 26th, Jill spent time shopping in Hammersmith. CCTV captured her, moving casually through the stores, relaxed and unhurried. There was nothing to suggest she was being followed, no signs that she was in danger. After finishing her errands, Jill returned briefly to her Fulham home. She needed to collect some documents that had been faxed to her by her agent, John Roseman. Later that afternoon, she was scheduled to head into central London, where she was due to present the evening news. But Jill never made it. At around 11:30 a.m., neighbors heard a disturbance outside number 29 Gowan Avenue. Moments later, a passerby called emergency services, reporting a woman collapsed at her doorstep, blood pouring from a wound to her head. Paramedics could do nothing. Jill Dando had been shot once, execution style, with the gun pressed firmly against her temple. News of her murder spread rapidly across Britain. The nation's sweetheart, gunned down in broad daylight outside her own home. Police launched one of the largest manhunts London had seen in decades. But from the very beginning, investigators were at a disadvantage. There was little usable CCTV from the area. Unlike today, cameras were scarce, and Gowan Avenue offered almost nothing in terms of surveillance. Police had to rely heavily on eyewitnesses, and that quickly became a problem. Some neighbors reported hearing a scream. Others recalled seeing a tall man leaving Jill's garden path. Another motorist claimed they nearly struck someone running across the road, but none of the accounts matched. Was the man tall or short? Light-haired or dark? White or black? Each description contradicted the other, leaving detectives with a cloud of confusion rather than clarity. In the early hours of the investigation, police canvassed the streets of Fulham, desperate for leads. A neighbor recalled seeing a man sweating heavily as he waited at a bus stop shortly after the shooting. That testimony would later become one of the few concrete pieces of evidence detectives tried to build upon. As the nation reeled, Jill's own program, Crimewatch, aired a special reconstruction of her final moments. For the presenters and staff, it was surreal and agonizing. The show that helped solve crimes across Britain was now appealing for justice for one of its own. Viewers watched in shock as colleagues described their grief, their disbelief, and their determination to find answers. Meanwhile, police sealed off Gowan Avenue. Forensic teams combed through Jill's doorstep and the surrounding streets, searching for any clue that could point to her killer. But evidence was scarce. A single shot had been fired, quickly and efficiently, with no clear trace of the shooter left behind. By day 5 of the inquiry, detectives released their first major lead to the public. With the help of a key witness, they unveiled a composite sketch of a man believed to be seen near the scene around the time of the murder. But even that would only deepen the mystery. Police soon released a computer-generated image based on a key witness at a bus stop on Fulham Palace Road. The man had stood out because he was sweating so heavily that it soaked into the collar of his shirt. Detectives believed this image resembled their prime suspect. The investigation brought disruption to local residents, but most said they didn't mind. All they wanted was for Jill's killer to be caught and brought to justice. It was worth remembering that Jill didn't often return to her Fulham home. She spent most of her time at her fiancé's house in Chiswick, only occasionally dropping by Gowan Avenue to collect clothes or paperwork. That raised a troubling question. Did the killer know she would be there that morning? Statistically, the first place police look is close to home. In 90% of murders, the victim knows their killer. Jill's relationships were examined one by one. Her former partner, Bob Wheaton, had received £35,000 from her. But was it a gift or a loan? Investigators wondered whether money might have sparked motive. Her agent, John Roseman, was also scrutinized. He had faxed papers to Jill that morning, knowing she would stop by Gowan Avenue to collect them. Even her fiancé, Dr. Alan Farthing, was questioned, though there was no evidence linking him. When Alan spoke publicly, his grief was raw. He said he could not imagine a single reason why anyone would want to harm Jill, describing her as gentle, kind, and perfect. He pleaded for anyone with knowledge, anyone who noticed a change in someone's behavior, to come forward. Outside Jill's home, the tributes grew by the hour. Dozens of bouquets were left along the doorstep. Her colleague Nick Ross left a simple but haunting message. Sleep well, the same words Jill used to close every episode of Crimewatch. Meanwhile, police appealed for information about another possible suspect, a wit. Clean-shaven, around 38 to 40 years old, well-dressed, and seen running from the scene carrying a mobile phone. Yet despite forensic teams working tirelessly, by the time they removed the scaffolding and tarpaulin from Gowan Avenue, detectives admitted they were no closer to finding her killer. Scotland Yard then appointed a fresh team of senior detectives, hoping new eyes might find overlooked leads. Not long after, the BBC newsroom received a chilling phone call. The caller claimed the Serbians were responsible. The theory gained traction. Jill had recently fronted a humanitarian appeal for victims of the Kosovo conflict, a campaign that criticized Serbia during the bloody Balkan War. Some pointed the finger at Milorad Ulemek, a feared Serbian hitman who led the Red Berets, a paramilitary group loyal to Slobodan Milosevic. Ulemek matched some of the witness descriptions, and in 2005 he would be jailed for another high-profile assassination. Could he have been behind Jill's killing? If so, why hadn't the group claimed responsibility? Political murders were almost always public, yet this one remained silent. Other theories emerged too. Perhaps Jill was targeted because of Crimewatch itself. The program had helped put countless criminals behind bars. Could someone she had helped expose have wanted revenge? After all, Another unsolved case around the same time involved the brutal killing of Swedish tourist Maria Wodianski, who was murdered in London within hours of arriving. The senselessness of Jill's killing made people wonder, was it random or was it meant to send a message? The deeper detectives dug, the stranger the case became. Britain's most important unsolved murder had now taken on a dark international dimension. Crimewatch had once helped secure the conviction of Kenneth Noy, a man infamous for the M25 road rage killing, a man considered highly dangerous. And so, in the wake of Jill Dando's death, one of the earliest conspiracy theories suggested that Noy had ordered a hit in revenge. The story went that a Spanish barman named Joe was asked to carry it out. But from the start, many believed this was far-fetched. In reality, violent crimes of this kind are rarely the work of strangers. More often, they are committed by someone you know, or someone who knows someone close to you. That suspicion gradually led investigators away from international revenge plots and toward the possibility of a local stalker. As the first anniversary of Jill's murder came and went, the pressure on the Metropolitan Police was immense. Still, no arrests had been made. Newspapers demanded answers. Broadcasters ran nightly segments. Someone had to be responsible. The public believed justice was overdue. Detectives began to focus on an unusual clue. Their records showed that in November of 1998, someone had accessed a website that contained Jill Dando's private address. It was the only time that year the site had been used in that way. Soon after, a man began making bizarre phone calls to local utility companies, gas, water, electricity, trying to have Jill's accounts changed into his name. It was against this backdrop that attention shifted to a man living just a few hundred yards from Jill's home in Fulham. His name was Barry George. He was 39 years old and by reputation, something of an oddball. Neighbors described him as strange, unpredictable, the kind of man you might cross the street to avoid. Though he had learning difficulties, he was not unintelligent, but he was a fantasist, constantly reinventing himself under false identities. At one point, he claimed to be a national karate champion under the name Paul Gadd, the real name of disgraced singer Gary Glitter. Later, he styled himself as a stunt roller skater called Steve Majors, a name he borrowed from the American TV show The $6 Million Man. At another time, he even claimed to be related to the rock band Queen. Barry George also had a criminal record, including a conviction for sexual assault. More troubling still, he had a history of stalking women and a well-known obsession with television personalities. To the police, this was enough to merit closer scrutiny. Officers searched his flat several times. The place was filthy, filled with piles of rubbish and personal clutter. What they found was disturbing. Camouflage clothing, a gun holster, magazines about firearms, lists of weapons and their prices, reels of undeveloped film containing photographs of over 400 women, and among the pictures, images of well-known TV presenters, including Jill Dando. Barry George was placed under surveillance, and on May 28, 2000, more than a year after Jill's death, he was arrested. After 4 days of questioning at Hammersmith Police Station, he was formally charged with murder under his full name, Barry Michael George. When his trial began, Jill's fiancé, Alan Farthing, and her brother Nigel were present in the courtroom to hear the charges read aloud. Prosecutors told the jury that 2 witnesses had seen a man loitering near Jill's home on the morning she was killed. One neighbor, Susan Mays, identified Barry George in an ID parade. But the case was circumstantial, with one major exception. Forensic experts claimed to have found minute traces of gunshot residue in Jill's hair near the fatal wound. A similar particle was discovered in the pocket of a coat from Barry George's flat. To the prosecution, this was the golden nugget, the key piece of evidence tying him to the murder. George pleaded not guilty. His defense was led by Michael Mansfield QC, who argued that the residue was not conclusive, that it could have been transferred from many other sources. Still, the jury was swayed. The judge, Mr. Justice Gage, told George directly, "The jury has found that you shot Jill Dando. This was no spur-of-the-moment act. It was premeditated, and it involved planning. Why you did it may never be known. Outside court, Jill's colleagues and loved ones tried to process their loss. At her hometown paper, the Weston and Somerset Mercury, condolence books filled quickly. For many, the grief carried echoes of Princess Diana's death 2 years earlier. People lined the streets as Jill's coffin passed by. One mourner called her our sunflower, a symbol of warmth and brightness. But even as the nation mourned, doubts lingered. Critics of the case argued that nothing could truly be proved against Barry George, except that he was a vulnerable man. They warned that it must never become acceptable to lock away an innocent person simply because the real killer could not be found. The coffin arrived at the church at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Inside lay Jill Dando, accompanied on her final journey by her fiancé, Alan Farthing, her father, Jack, and her brother, Nigel. The service was led by Reverend Roger Collins, a man who had known Jill since her childhood. Just weeks earlier, life had seemed so full of promise. Jill was entering a new and exciting chapter, but everything changed on Monday, the 26th of April, 1999. The beloved face of British television, the nation's girl next door, had been shot dead on her doorstep. And the one question that haunted everyone was, why? Investigators turned to a local man named Barry George. He was convicted and spent nearly 8 years in prison. But doubts soon began to emerge. In August 2008, the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial. This time, the case against him began to unravel. The prosecution had relied heavily on a single fragment of gunshot residue found in the pocket of his coat, but experts admitted it was impossible to know if that tiny particle proved anything at all. A person might have fired a gun, stood near one when it was discharged, or even picked it up afterward. Contamination could not be ruled out. To make matters worse, Barry George's coat had been placed on a mannequin before forensic testing. That same mannequin had been used for other garments linked to other cases, raising the possibility that the residue was transferred inside the laboratory. Judges later agreed the original jury had been misled. Without the gunpowder evidence, the case became paper thin. Even one of the jurors admitted that without that particle, the rest of the prosecution's case simply didn't stand up. At the High Court, Barry George was acquitted. The police were left frustrated, but the truth was undeniable. After nearly a decade, they were back to square one. By then, the trail had already gone cold. Jill's murder scene had been flooded with people in those first critical minutes. Paramedics, neighbors, concerned passers-by. All wanted to help, but their presence may have destroyed fragile forensic evidence that could never be recovered. The investigation was vast, detailed, and determined. But at its core, critics argue it searched for proof rather than truth. Detectives had focused on a suspect, then tried to make the evidence fit. And once that evidence collapsed, so did the case. Today, so many years later, the likelihood of another suspect being brought to justice seems slim. Everyone close to Jill, her fiancé, her former partner, her colleagues, had their movements accounted for. Without a confession, there is little hope of new answers. Jill Dando's murder remains one of Britain's most haunting mysteries, an unsolved puzzle that may never be solved. She was the nation's darling, loved by millions, and yet no one sits behind bars for her killing. Her brother once said Jill was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps that is all the truth we will ever have.